What is the best way to find the truth? Our present world has a very hard time knowing the truth. Not only does the quest for truth consume too much time for the average 9-to-5 person to really do the adequate research necessary, but even then, the evidence, quote unquote, and facts are so convoluted and misleading because of all the misinformation, the deep fakes and whatnot that you have out there, and all the special interest bias that creates this information. This has brought us to a place where we, as a collective humanity, we are descending into nihilism, the state at which we cannot believe anything anymore, because the only logical thing to do with all of this misinformation and convoluted facts is to shrug and say it's not important anyway because it doesn't affect me yet, at least not yet. So what is the best way to find the truth? Should we have the time to do so? And what could readily allow us that time? Well, I have an idea for you today. Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Capital, contends that the best way to find the truth is a triangulation strategy, where you're taking different opinions from different people, and these are credible people, and you're having them state their opinions. I'm going to tell you the process that you go through with that. Ray Dalio's hedge fund wants to know the truth about the economy and what is the best course of action for investing. So first, what he does is he has his sources all speak together, espousing their own views on a certain topic, and then he has those opinions and evidence and justifications for their opinions brought to the group in front of others. Next, each listener evaluates each speaker on their credibility and other factors to create a profile. He feeds that data into a computer to analyze the data and calculate the triangulation point that is the truth as best it can be known. And he weights each of these speakers, their view by the credibility that their peers have given them throughout that conversation. Dalio's hedge fund, Bridgewater Capital, has results to prove it too. Bridgewater is the most successful hedge fund of all time. Now, I wish all parties were so ethical in espousing their views in all situations that you could trust them to be intending on arriving at the truth and seeking the truth, not just winning for their particular selfish aims. Would it not utterly change the world if we could apply Dalio's triangulation formula methodology to situations where not all evaluating parties are so ethical that they may actually avoid, confuse, obfuscate, and authoritatively deny the truth? That if we had a way of detecting this and showing their errors and logical fallacies to the world. Imagine that impact of this application in our debates on the most pressing issues of our day, for instance, climate change, gun control, immigration, free speech, and gender equality, which are at the moment being reduced to clickbait sound bites such as Jordan Peterson slams feminist and the like. With the advent of AI, it strikes me that what is now possible for the first time ever is that we could have an unbiased, consistent, and methodical third party, the AI, evaluate with speed and logical consistency of both parties' arguments. Yes, you would have to trust or prove that the AI wouldn't change the way it evaluates based upon the parties involved and the topic discussed. But this would become possible as AI in general becomes more trusted as people continue to use ChatGPT. AI Debate Analyzer bot could show us these unethical, quote-unquote, chess moves in any debate, as it were. It would produce a result at every stage of that debate, showing the signs where one side avoided an answer, or changed the topic, responded with a logical fallacy, or failed to supply adequate evidence, etc. This type of tool, an unbiased debate analyzer, would be enormously valuable to evaluating political candidates, or even covering C-SPAN conversations in an unbiased manner so that future world opinion can no longer be swayed by a biased media, or kept in the dark by the sheer volume of hours that they talk. People could consult the AI to see summaries with analysis where their leaders are failing or misleading them. Each leader could also be given its own reputation score. Like an ELO rating in chess, which is basically just your chess rating. You get a score, it goes up and down when you win or lose. And it would track how often these people lie or use unethical tactics in their debates. There actually already exists an algorithm that evaluates the degree to which one's arguments could lead to the truth. And if we take these programs as a model, it would be easy to extrapolate out the logic and apply it to political debates, trials in courts of law, exchanges between guests in a podcast, news reports, and even our own domestic social interactions. For instance, Chess.com's game review tool allows the nearly instant evaluation of every chess move in any game, and automatically categorizes these moves into 10 categories, such as brilliant, excellent, good, etc. Maybe a mistake, missed win, or a blunder. They categorize every single move. This chess algo combines two separate components into the code. One, Stockfish, the AI chess bot. This part evaluates and scores the position on every move with a plus or minus for the white side. It also calculates potential lines of moves that you could have from this position, and it calls these lines. For both sides, it calculates these lines in order to give that particular position that score that it gives. And then the second element of this program that evaluates your chess game is the classification element, the move categorization of each move into a certain category determined by the change in score from the previous position, and the possible other changes in score that could have been made in that same position. So for instance, a player with a move could get a move rating as brilliant if and only if the move was hard to see, such as a queen sacrifice, for instance, and that move resulted in a much higher positive score for that side than it would have if you made the second best move. And that move would also be classified as a blunder if the player sacrificed the queen, for instance, without proper justification. So that's just an example of how it classifies moves. It looks at the result of what would happen. And in a similar manner, you can see that classifying moves in its own algorithm in that component layer of programming goes beyond the scope of just chess. It's a logic that can be applied to any game or any scenario, and that has many choices available, any scenario that has many choices available to the player or parties involved. To create this debate evaluator AI, all that is needed is not the Stockfish chess engine, which is very hard to build, but simply the logic around evaluating certain responses into certain categories and classifying them, say for instance from a professional debate competition model, using the judge. How do the judges at professional debate competitions judge, and how do they score the debate? It strikes me that with a small tweak in this algorithm, we could feed a large language model, an LLM such as ChatGPT or Bard, etc., an entire transcript of a debate between two people, gathering both sides' intelligence and counter arguments and appropriate points about how each side failed to adequately address aspects of their argument, either willingly or because of a lack of substance. It would know whether you just purposely evaded a topic or your response tackled the topic but didn't do so adequately, and it would give you a score on the debate at each moment after each response from each participant. That was the original point of such conversations between those holding different views, as with Plato and Aristotle, the dialectics. The point was that these two people who were both intelligently equipped with knowledge around the topic, and both have an ethical responsibility and dedication to seeking the truth, not to just representing their own side, could come together and talk so that the group listening to them could be educated and leave as a result more intelligent and more well educated around a topic. Sadly, this rarely happens in today's society. We are not taught debate, logic, critical thinking as a separate class, as a methodology in our primary education. In most public schools, it is only taught as one small aspect of writing essays in our English courses, and it fails to get its deserved focus to hone the skill appropriately, because the teacher also has to focus on all these other things, like remembering literary content, symbolism, themes, interpretation, all these things, which are also important. It's not until undergraduate work or law school that these fine points are tuned. If you don't think so, consider a couple examples of what would be required to appropriately evaluate logical arguments. I'll give you 3 questions. See if you know any of the answers to these. What is syllogism? Number 2, name 3 types of fallacies and explain what they are. Number 3, what does it mean to be logically valid? Alright, so here are the examples. Syllogism, or the answers. Syllogism is a logical reasoning method that consists of 2 premises and a conclusion. It is a deductive argument structure that follows a specific pattern. Here's the example of syllogism. A major premise, all humans are mortal. Minor premise, Socrates is a human. And then the conclusion, Socrates is immortal. Answer to number 2, fallacies. These are very interesting. I'm going to read all 10 because I think that you'll enjoy hearing them if you're interested in this talk so far, 10 minutes in. I didn't know many of these. I've heard a few of them, like straw man concept and ad hominem, but I didn't know really what they meant totally. So fallacies. Number 1, ad hominem. Attacking the person making the argument instead of addressing the argument itself. We see this all the time in how most arguments are undermined in the media. Oh, that person's not credible, they're a quack, or they're a pseudoscientist. This involves focusing on personal characteristics or actions rather than the merits of the argument. And it's a fallacy. If you see anyone doing that, a red alert should go off in your mind. Oh, that's the ad hominem fallacy. It doesn't make sense. Number 2, straw man. Misrepresenting or distorting an opponent's argument to make it easier to attack. So this involves mischaracterizing the position or argument being made and then refuting the distorted version. Basically, you could say this is like blowing things out of proportion. Kind of like when someone draws a little caricature of you, they distort your face in a way that's kind of comical, and then you'd go, oh, that's not really me. That's not really my argument. Number 3. Appeal to authority. I see this all the time. Relying on the opinion or position of an authority figure or expert as the sole basis for accepting an argument. This involves assuming that something is true or valid simply because someone with authority or expertise says so. Number 4. False dilemma. Presenting a limited number of options and suggesting that those are the only options, when in fact there are many possible choices, and in reality there are more alternatives or nuances to consider. 5. Circular reasoning. Using the conclusion of an argument as one of the premises of that argument, without providing any additional evidence or support. This results in a logical loop where the argument is assumed to be true because the conclusion is already accepted as true. And one great example is in history. We're looking at the pyramids going, oh, the ancient Egyptians of 5,000 years ago built these pyramids because that's who lived there. We already accepted that's who lived there, and we accept that as known, so we take for granted that they must have built the pyramids. We know that this is the tools they use because this is the only tools available. So because these are the only tools available, these are the tools they use. It's A, if A then B, if B then A, and it's recursive back and forth. Number 6, hasty generalization, drawing a conclusion based on insufficient evidence or a small sample size. This involves making a broad generalization or assumption without considering all relevant data. Number 7, slippery slope. I really like this one. Asserting that a particular action or event will lead to a series of increasingly dire or extreme consequences without sufficient evidence to support the causal link between these. So like it's making something more extreme and basically going, oh, if we let people have guns, then we're going to have tons of people going out and acting rashly with them and killing people. It's like, well, there's a lot of things that have to happen for someone to do that. Is that causal link really established? And that's an example. I'm not saying that's a good example, but that's sort of the example that you might make, is taking one thing and saying all these other extra things are going to happen. Number 8, appeal to emotion. Manipulating emotions such as fear, pity, or sympathy to evoke a response or acceptance of an argument without relying on logical reasoning or evidence. It's like when someone changes the topic and makes you feel bad about something because you questioned them. Now you're a bad person when you should have trusted them, for instance. That's manipulation. That's an appeal to emotion. It's an appeal to your guilt about questioning their, you don't trust me? That kind of thing. Number 9, post hoc ergo prompter hoc. Maybe I'm mispelling or mispronouncing that. Assuming that because one event follows another, the first event must be the cause of the second. This involves drawing a causal connection based solely on temporal sequence. So just because B happened after A doesn't mean that A caused B, essentially. And then lastly, number 10, false analogy. Drawing a comparison between two things that are not actually comparable in relevant ways. This involves assuming that because two things are similar in one aspect, they must be similar in other aspects as well. We do see this all the time, but this actually requires a bit of art. It's less done in the media, and it's more done in maybe in preaching and things like that. I would say in speeches. It's not as nasty of of a fallacy, but it is present. So just be on guard when anyone gives you an analogy. Really think, is this analogy, does it totally align in the element that they're trying to make the analogy for? It doesn't mean that the two things are similar in every other way. They're saying this is similar in this way to this other thing. And you have to say, is it really similar in that way to that other thing? Is there really a basis for saying that these two things are similar in that one way? Okay. And then the answer to number 3, logically valid. What does that mean, logically valid? Being logically valid means that an argument follows a correct logical structure and form. That's it. It just follows a certain form. It doesn't mean that it's true. If you say something's logically valid, it doesn't mean that it's true. It means that it follows that particular form of a correct logical structure, such that if the premise is true, the conclusion must also be true. It doesn't mean the premise is true, though. So you have to look at the premise. If something's logically valid, it's like, okay, well, yes, if you come from this point of view and you assume this, I can see why you would have that, hold that conclusion as a belief also. And that's really the basis for how I engage with most people in their arguments, is to say, like, or their beliefs about things, to say, well, okay, why do you think that way? Okay, you think that way because of this, and I trace it back to get their premise, and I go, okay, that's their premise. Okay, given that premise, yeah, that all follows from that, then that's a logically constructed argument. Now I can debate their premise with them if I choose to, or I can just kind of go, okay, cool, my curiosity is satisfied. I don't agree with their premise, but it's fine. They can hold that premise and maybe an opinion, and if they hold that opinion, then the conclusion follows. So totally fine if people have different opinions. What's kind of at least my purpose when I talk with people, as an aside, is to say, like, okay, I know their premise, so now I understand their reasoning. I can understand if there's a premise and then there's some mislogic involved with going, okay, you hold this premise, but that premise doesn't logically follow to get this conclusion. There's a flaw here, and these other fallacies are present inside your argument. So you have to look at that too. So we have a world equipped. The bottom line is, these like tests right here that I just gave you, probably 5% of you could have known all of that. I wouldn't even think that high. Maybe 1% of the people watching knew every single one of those things. But these are just a few basic components that are required in order to really critically evaluate and use logical reasoning to evaluate the arguments and things that people are saying in social media and the ways that these views are espoused, on podcasts and other things, the things that we've agreed to all of our lives that we haven't questioned. And maybe we've questioned, but we haven't really been able to come to any firm ground. We're descending into nihilism again. We go, well, I just don't know, and I really can't know, and I don't have time to know. Right? So we have a world that's unequipped to deal with all this complexity that's out there, and all of the arguments, and to sift through all of those things and find the truth. That's my premise. I'm using that as a starting point. I think that's pretty clear. So when one side decides to use obfuscation, which is basically just hiding things, putting it in the dark and not looking at it, trying to store it away, don't look behind the curtain, that's obfuscation. Rhetoric, or other kinds of verbal sleight of hand, the AI would know and report it based upon relevancy and accuracy. We could build an AI that says, okay, this guy just said all this, here's the relevancy score to the other point that was made before he talked, and here's the accuracy score of the things that he mentioned and how much that really does actually impact and fully support, the point that he's trying to make. The AI bot could also serve as the end of such arguments, or debates, to provide missed wins, okay, like an evaluation, like counter arguments that could have been given but weren't. In response to apparent weaknesses, it can find the apparent weaknesses in, the first person's what they said, and look at the second person and what they responded to and go, it had this weakness, but the person down here, what they said didn't address that weakness, it didn't bring it out to light, and so it was a missed win for that debate. You could have had that point, but you didn't. We would inject, how would we do this? We would inject how a debate judge or a neutral third-party legal team, for instance, would score two sides of a court trial. We would use those methods and classifications on how a group of legal professors evaluate a mock trial, and then make an algorithm that similarly evaluates and categorizes each argument and response. Unfortunately, the training data required to train the AI, to my knowledge, yet doesn't exist. So for example, we don't have polls of credible sources, as Ray Dalio might say, given at any certain point during debates or during podcast interviews. You don't have an audience live poll that shows, okay, based on what he said, now I'm more in favor of him, or here were some potential problems. So you'd have to feed the AI that data at every stage so it could learn how to identify these things. And to my knowledge, we don't have that data set. Why we don't, I don't know. Why has this not been done? Just thinking about that kind of gets me excited. Like, this would be a really cool way that we could pull, like watching, for instance, CNBC Fast Money, where the commentators offer their views on a particular stock and debate each other. And then the audience is polled somewhere that shows, percentage who's leaning one way or the other, or how much each argument affects that weighting of people siding with one or the other could be drawn out of that data. So, or also think about sports shows where you have, like on ESPN, pardon the interruption, two guys debating about what person's better or what team's going to win or whatnot. It would make it a more engaging show to have that live poll at the bottom of the screen, in my opinion. So we could definitely do that. We create shows with that live poll and then start to extract that data. The engaged audience polling would certainly raise the interest for the viewing public, and the polling element would then be able to produce the data set with which we could train the AI. So, potentially, one first step is to look for sources of data sets that do exist, but of which I am not currently aware. And perhaps second, to propose some sort of new live polling elements in certain TV shows, like I just mentioned, that would enhance the TV show or podcast that does feature frequent debates. So anyway, that's the conclusion of my article on how to best find the truth, some ideas around it, and potential technologies that could really help our world. I mean, imagine again these sound bites that we're descending into on Instagram and all over the place on social media, where X slams Y, and look at how this person roasts this other person. It's like, yeah, we want to watch like the gladiatorial circus of it all, and we're getting lost in that spectacle rather than being able to kind of go to something and go, hey, I'd really like to know what we can do in our world to improve our world. Where should my beliefs firmly rest? How can I actually base my opinions on something solid and give me something to talk with people in a sensible way about these topics around the dinner table or boardroom table in the future. So here's to all of you truth hunters out there. I'll see you next time.